In Lesson 1, we're going to cover several definitions in the business ethics course. It's key to understand the definitions so that we're all speaking the same language. It can be kind of difficult because the word ethics has thousands of definitions. But if you look on this page, you'll see some key terminology. One of them, the first one is, it's codes and principles and values that govern decisions. So you'll see something like that in most of the definitions of ethics. In addition, there's determining the difference between good and bad, right and wrong. You'll see that a lot. And then behavior. And it's always a key, is decision making that drives behavior. And the last one that you'll see often is obligation or moral duty. Those are very common in many of the definitions of ethics. Morals and values are pretty close in definition, and we'll get to values in a little bit later. But morals really are what drive, they kind of serve as templates to drive our behavior. And a lot of it came from innate in us when we were born, some of our innate characteristics, and also in the environment we were raised in and our life experiences. And morals kind of serve to drive, you've probably heard the term moral compass, and it's driving our decision making. And that can be tough if a person's morals are in conflict with an organization's policies that they work at. That can often lead to unethical behavior, reduced productivity, and things like that. Next, we're going to go on to talk about the term corporate social responsibility or social responsibility. And it's kind of corporate social responsibility, or CSR, has kind of become a buzzword in the last probably 10 or 15 years as companies recognize that society is expecting more of them than just providing a service or a product. They're expecting corporations to contribute to society. And a great example of that is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and how they try to help out, and even just companies, local companies that get involved in the community and do trash pickup and things like that, and other volunteer activities. That all feeds into social responsibility, and I think that's becoming a standard part of most organizations, as they're addressing how they are going to be more socially responsible. So one good example, when we start talking about the term of accountability and responsibility, is Admiral Hyman Rickover. He was the father of the nuclear navy. And if you take a second to read this paragraph here, you'll find out that someone's got to be responsible. And if you as we get to some of the case studies, you'll see that no one really took responsibility, and no one was held accountable for their actions until it became very blatantly obvious, or there was some catastrophic failure like in Enron and things like that. And so we're going to talk, one of the goals of this course is to be able to recognize that stuff, and what are the actions you can take if you to hold people accountable and responsible. Okay, so as we're keep talking about responsibility, let's talk about some of the benefits of corporate social responsibility. And that's a pretty long list there in front of you, but as you can see, you'll have increased productivity, you'll have more support from your local community, better sales, you'll have better employee retention and talent management, and that's becoming a huge factor in our modern global economy, is that trying to retain talented and diverse workforce. And the other part is the personnel that work for you feel just a better sense of intrinsic reward, or the personal feeling of satisfaction at working at a place. They'll feel ownership, and they'll help out. That'll end up affecting the bottom line of most companies. It's rare to find a company that's socially responsible that doesn't do well. Okay, and now let's move on to the term of transparency. You've probably heard this term before, but what it really kind of boils down to is, how open is a company with the information that they have? We're not talking about like trade secrets, but we're talking about just their basic things. So if a company recognizes, hey, our product's not safe, how transparent are they with the public? Do they disclose that information, or do they wait until there's an incident before they disclose that? And you can see there's the 5 ways for business to be more transparent. I think the term being real, that's just recognizing that you employ humans and you're not some big giant corporation that doesn't have any, that there, no one understands who the people are that work there. Sharing your opinion, that kind of goes for the workers, being open to other people's opinion and having empathy for other people's situations. And then honesty, that's always key in any organization. If you can't be honest with each other, it's difficult to build trust. And then timely and responsive. I mean, that kind of comes down to, if you do detect something wrong, how do you respond to it? Do you wait and hide it like we talked about before? Okay, so now let's go on and talk a little bit more about accountability. So you can see there, accountability, obligation, or willingness to accept responsibility for actions. And that, like the paragraph from Admiral Rickover, is someone has to be responsible and has to be accountable. And if no one's accountable, then it's likely that unethical or poor decision making can propagate through your organization. And so if you don't already have a culture of accountability, the acronym SIMPLE is a good acronym to remember, and you can easily apply it within your organization. The first one is setting clear expectations. If your people don't know what to expect and your consumers don't know what to expect, it'll be difficult for them to follow your wishes and your desires as a business leader. Invite commitment, that's kind of obtaining buy-in. And then you have to always measure progress. You can have a great set of expectations, but if you don't measure how well you're meeting those expectations, then it'd be difficult to understand what changes you would need to make, or if you're on the right or wrong track. And then providing feedback. That feedback's always key in any situation, is to allow you to check yourself and figure out if you need to make adjustments. And then the link to consequences. That's holding people accountable. And they have to see if someone is held accountable. That has to be visible and transparent within the organization, so people understand that the right actions are being taken and people are being held accountable for improper behavior. And then evaluating effectiveness. How effective is your program? Have you created that culture? And that can be difficult at times to obtain that information, but you'll likely see it in other indicators such as the employee productivity, in customer feedback, things like that. Okay, so we already talked about the acronym SIMPLE, and here's a few more, just some tips about how to implement that and things to think about. And one of the things to recognize is inviting commitment can be challenging. A lot of times, the most successful projects are started from the bottom up in an organization, and that tends to facilitate more buy-in. And then as long as the senior leadership supports those initiatives, they're likely to be successful, especially when trying to establish or alter a culture within an organization. And then for providing feedback, as you see there, it says it won't solve problems by itself, but it definitely opens the door, and your employees and customers and other stakeholders will be more open to coming to you to help solve problems and to bring the problems to your attention before they become more ingrained within your organization. Okay, now let's move on to values. Well, what are values? Like I said, values and morals are pretty close. Again, it's standards that drive us to act or choose one action over another. I think that's a pretty simple way of thinking about it. And values are kind of, again, a result of how we were raised, what environment we lived in, what experiences we've had in our lives. And values continue to change slightly over time. And within a company, your personal values can definitely conflict with the corporate values. And one way, as a business leader, you should recognize that that's the case, and you may have to address those issues. And it's those differences that can cause inappropriate behavior, frustration, reduced productivity. And so one thing a lot of companies do is they have a kind of a survey, annual survey or biannual survey to assess the corporate culture. And a lot of times if you gear those questions properly, you can root out the differences and the conflict between personal and corporate values. Okay, again, so values, if they are aligned between a personal and a corporate, they'll tend to build trust. And trust is key in any organization. And the shared values within a company, they create the company's identity. And a great example of that is Southwest Airlines, and they have a great corporate value system, and that's very evident if you fly with them. They value humor, and it's part of who they are, and they value being open and honest with the customers, and you can see that. And what that's done is that the customers trust them. They have a very good, loyal customer base, and I think a lot of organizations could learn a lot from how Southwest Airlines conducts their business. Okay, so if you want a little more information, James Collins, he's a great writer. He's written a lot, and his book, The Built to Last, there is a great book. It talks about, one of the things it talks about is that companies that have put a lot of emphasis on strong core values, the right core values, tend to do very well. And again, another great the example of that is Southwest Airlines. Companies like Google, Zappos, there are a lot of companies that do very well with their employees. Okay, so let's talk about the values versus ethical values. This is a gray area, but I think if you think ethical values are kind of ethics guide the gray area. Okay, and so ethical values are what drives our decision making when it comes to an ethical decision. Okay, so what drives us to make certain decisions? Is it a monetary issue? Do we decide to take the pens home because we need them, we can't afford to buy them ourselves, or do we choose to quit working at a company because our spiritual beliefs, values no longer align with the company's? Okay, you can see there's a lot there on the values versus ethical values, and that's really something to be aware of, not only as an employee but also as a business leader. Is that those two subtle differences between the ethical values and the values can create tension, and again, like we've talked about, can cause issues and loss of talent, reduced productivity, things like that. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the next part of our lesson.